So let's talk about the representation systems in NLP. And I'm going back to basics here. When you think about your experience, how do you experience your life through your senses? Now, everybody knows they've got 5 senses. You've got the sense of sight, hearing, feeling, smell, and taste. And they map directly to 5 primary modalities of 5 ways of experiencing what you experience in your life. You can see things, which is the visual modality. You can hear things, which is your auditory modality, your hearing. And you can also feel things or touch things. That's what we call the kinesthetic modality. And then you can also smell things, which is called olfactory. That's the sense of smell. And you can also taste things, which is gustatory. Okay, so that's the only way you can experience what you experience in your life. So everything you experience from the time you're born to the time you die, it's one of those 5 things. You see it, you hear it, you feel it, you smell it, or you taste it. And then what you do is you talk to yourself about that experience. I put this in a different color at the bottom. So this AD stands for auditory digital. And what auditory digital means is that you're making a judgment, you're putting meaning on your experience by talking to yourself inside your head about that experience. So that's not really a modality, but although it's usually classified as one, it's really how you discuss or make judgments on the experience you've just had. In other words, it's your internal dialogue. It's what you say to yourself. It's what makes sense to you, what is logical to conclude from what you experience. But it's not a true sense. It doesn't call out one of the other 5. It's separate and distinct. So these representation systems are the building blocks, the Lego blocks of everything you experience in your life. And this is really important because if you want to understand how you get results in life, you need to understand these modalities and how they structure how you see the world. Right? The way it works is like this. I want to imagine this is your head. This is you. And you've just experienced something for the first time. Maybe you saw a house on fire, or maybe you saw an accident, or maybe you saw somebody that really impresses you, or something great happens. And you say, oh, wow, here's a situation. Right? Now, before you make a judgment whether the situation is a good situation or a bad situation, you first have experienced it through your senses. And there's a guy called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi who wrote a book called Flow, which is all about subjective experience. And he reckoned that at least 2 million pieces of information are coming through those 5 senses every single second of every single day. So what he says is 2 million bits per second, or pieces of information per second, are flowing through all of your nervous system. That's the pictures you see, what you're hearing, what you're sensing, what you're feeling, what you're smelling, and what you're tasting. And as they go through your senses, are absorbed through your senses, so you make sense of it, what happens is it creates an internal representation of that outside event. So let's say it's a house on fire, or it's somebody who has impressed you, something that is an unusual situation. Before you actually make sense of it, you first take in that information through your senses. And then what you do is you filter that information down to, let's say, a problem. You say, oh, based on what I notice about this situation, I see this as a problem. Okay? And that problem is filtered down to only about 127 bits of information. What that means is, there's millions of pieces of information flowing into your nervous system every second. Consciously, you're only aware of a small amount of this information, about 127 bits every second, or what's called 7 plus or minus 2 chunks. So that tiny amount of information influences how you feel. If you see it as a problem, you're going to feel a certain way. Maybe it's dread, maybe it's fear, maybe it's guilt, something like that. And that feeling determines how you behave, and that behavior drives your results. Now, The reason that this is important is because when you change this filter in here, when you change the internal way you see the world, that problem could become an opportunity. But only if you know how to upgrade your thinking and change how you see the world. And one of the important things we do in NLP is looking for those opportunities to change how you see the world. That's called reframing in NLP. And it's really, really important, because before you make a decision between a problem and an opportunity, you have to make sense of the situation. You have to talk to yourself about this. You have to come to a conclusion. And the difference between something that is a problem or an opportunity depends on what's going on inside your nervous system here. Okay? And this is what we want. We want to know about how we can change this filter here to see more opportunities and less problems. In other words, we're saying there's no failure, only feedback. There's opportunities to see things in a better light in order to have more options in our life. And this isn't just about positive mental attitude. It's genuinely about seeing, can we see opportunities to do things differently, not just to say this is a terrible situation. We're looking for opportunities to have more choices in our life. Okay? So what this means is, I want you to pay attention. If there's 2 million pieces of information going into your senses every second, but you're only aware of 127 bits, that means you're losing a lot of information. And the decision that you're making is based on not the full facts of the situation. This is also made worse by the fact that when you communicate with somebody, the words you use only hold about 7% of the information that's been communicated. This was captured by Morabian in 1971, and also a guy called Birdwhistle in 1970. They're studying communication and incongruence, and what they found is when people were incongruent, they communicated that incongruence only 7% of the time through the words they said. But actually, most of the incongruence came across through their tone of voice. Their tone of voice would change, or by their physiology. They would shift their physiology about 55% of the time. So what they concluded, both of them independently concluded, that when you communicate what you're communicating, actually only 7% of that communication is contained in the words, and 93% of that information is outside of the words you're listening to. It's through the tonality and the physiology of what you're saying. Now, this is important because what it means is that if you look at a situation or a problem, let's pretend you're looking at this iceberg here. The iceberg represents only 7% of the information that you're aware of consciously right now. But when you actually take a step back, you start to realize there's a lot more information below the level of your conscious awareness. And this is what we call our unconscious mind. So if we're aware of 7% of the information and 93% of it is unconscious, that means you could be making lots of assumptions about what's going on in your world based on that filtering system, by the deletions, the distortions, and the generalizations you have, that has you conclude that you have a problem when actually you actually might have an opportunity. And this is really, really important. Remember, 127 bits is all you have to make a decision on, but there's 2 million bits that's coming into your senses that you're not aware of, that's unconscious, it's outside of your level of consciousness. Now, this is really important in terms of results, because think about it. When you think about the results you get in your life, what influences your results? Now, the things that influence your results, of course, is your behavior. Right? And you can see the results you get, and you can see the way you behave. You can see how somebody else's behaves. But what determines your behavior? It depends on your skills and abilities. If you don't have good skills, you won't have good behaviors. You won't get good results. If you have amazing skills, you can behave in amazing ways, and you get amazing results. But other people don't know what skills and abilities you have because it's below the level of awareness of their consciousness. But here's the thing. Imagine you had amazing skills and abilities, but you didn't believe you were any good at that skill. Would you use that skill? You probably wouldn't. Why? Because you don't believe it. So why use it? So if you didn't believe you're a good speaker, would you practice speaking? Would you use that skill? Probably not. If you didn't believe you're an amazing consultant, would you probably wouldn't even practice consulting. If you didn't believe you're an amazing coach, would you practice coaching? So your beliefs almost become like on-off switches to your skills. In other words, if you don't believe you're good at something, you're unlikely to use that skill, which means you won't behave in that way, which you won't get your results. But there's a level below that, because what drives your beliefs is what's important to you, what we call your values. Your values are the things that are most important to you. So even if you believed you're a great coach or a great consultant or a great trainer, if it wasn't important to you to do coaching, if it wasn't important for you to do consulting, it wasn't important for you to do training, even though you believe you're good at it and you have the skills, you probably wouldn't do it. So your values are like the power source. They're like the batteries behind what you do. They give energy to what you're doing. And these together then create a deeper level of understanding, which is how you see yourself. Do you believe that you have great potential, or do you believe that you're a failure? Do you believe that you can do something, or do you believe that you can't? And that's called your identity statements. The statements you say to yourself about what you're capable of doing. Now, that means that of all of the things that influence your results, the thing that affects your results the most is how you see yourself, your identity statement. But here's the bit that I want you to pay attention to. Everything below this line is unconscious, and everything above this line is conscious. In other words, you can see the result you get in your life, and you can see the way you behave. You can see how somebody else's behave. So your results and your behaviors are mostly conscious. But your skills and abilities, your beliefs, your values and identity are mostly unconscious. And remember that most people want to change how they behave in order to get better results. So when you work at changing behaviors, you're only working at changing the top 7% of what happens in the person's life. But when you start to leverage beliefs, values, and most importantly, identity, then what happens is you start to make a difference to the person's life by giving them the opportunity to see themselves differently in the future and therefore get a better result. So one of the big things we want to do is we want to understand that if you want to create change, that all learning happens at the unconscious level. All behavior change happens at the unconscious level, and all change happens at the unconscious level. So when we work with NLP, we just don't want to change behavior. We want to change how the person sees themselves, and that works at the unconscious level through their beliefs, their values, and their identity. Essentially, what we're doing is we want to work at the level of your unconscious. So think about this. You have a conscious mind. That's what you think about consciously. That's the 127 bits. That's the 7%. That's what you're aware of consciously. But you're not aware of most of the things that's happening in your experience. For example, if I say to you, are you aware of the feeling your left foot against the ground right now? You'd probably say, well, I am now, because you brought it to my awareness. But where was that awareness before I said it? It was unconscious. So while your conscious mind is aware of the 7%, your unconscious mind is responsible for 93% of everything that's happening in your experience. But at the same time, your unconscious mind knows everything that's going on, which means your unconscious mind is the most powerful resource you have in changing your life. And most people don't even know they have an unconscious mind. So what we want to do and what we want to learn about is we want to work consciously with the unconscious mind to create change. That's what saying out loud. So what is NLP? NLP is about working consciously through the tools and techniques you learn with the unconscious mind in order to create change.